Well, let me say welcome everyone to the August 2026 Roots Action Education Fund Book Club. This is live and it is being recorded, and it is maybe the last one that we're doing live. Next month, we're going to be just recording and promoting the video to you. So, this is the end of the excitement, your last opportunity to ask penetrating questions of our guests. And so I encourage all of you who are here to put your name and where you're from and a little bit about you and what issues you're interested in, what you'd like to change about the world into the chat, and to add questions at any time into the chat. This is also a little bit different in that we are very privileged to have two guests, two authors of one terrific book. I'm holding it up, Remaking Democracy, How We Make the Worlds We Want, by Danielle Chynoweth and Elizabeth Adams. And very briefly, I'll tell you from their website, which is Remaking Democracy UCIMC.nationbuilder.com. And I will also put that in the chat since I couldn't remember it and don't expect you to. And somebody's beat me to it, so I won't. Danielle Chynoweth is a media justice and housing rights leader dedicated to building democratic power through organizing and education. She serves as an elected official working to end homelessness, previously served as organizing director for Media Justice and co-founded the Urbana-Champaign Independent Media Center. Danielle also teaches at the University of Illinois, the School for Designing a Society, which we will talk about, I hope, and in educational programs around the world. And Elizabeth Adams, PhD, is a composer, educator, and organizer whose work explores the intersections of art, political education, and collective action. For more than 2 decades, she has created anti-capitalist music performances, organized pop-up political education spaces with Free University NYC, and helped secure historic tenant protections through the Crown Heights Tenants Union. Elizabeth has taught at Columbia University and the School for Designing a Society. There is going to be way too much to talk about, so let's try to talk about as much of it as we can. Danielle and Elizabeth, whoever wants to go first, what's the basic idea behind this remarkable book?
Well, I think that we started this book about 10 years ago during what we'll call T-Man version 1.0, when there were a lot of folks coming into organizing for the first time, and we're asking seasoned organizer, what is to be done? Seasoned organizers, what's to be done? And we were discussing essentially how do we go about teaching? We talk a lot about the problems. We talk a lot about why we need to change systems, but there's very little places that discuss how. There might be mechanics around how to run a meeting or kind of the technical aspects of, getting protest permits, but there's very little conversation about how we think about making strategic interventions in oppressive systems led by our desires in ways that actually lead us to visions of the society that we want, especially at this time of rising fascism and rising seas.
Elizabeth, you want to add to that?
Um, the book is a book of theory, a book of practice, and a book of stories. So it has a theory of change, but every step of the theory of change we illustrate with exercises for you to try out the theory on whatever problem you're working on, and also stories of successful interventions that emphasize that particular part of the theory of change. It came out of the School for Designing a Society and from our organizing experience. the School for Designing a Society was founded by refugees from German fascism and their students starting at the University of Illinois, and then moving outside that institution. And elements of the theory of change that come directly from the school include a focus on desire, what do you really want, a focus on systems as a way of finding your own agency in the face of oppression, and also a focus on language, and a focus on creative practice as ways of playing with problems and unsticking things that seem intractable, changing perspective, and accessing parts of our brain that the crisis mode that we get into when we're dealing with oppression can prevent us from using. And so reclaiming that creative and associative capacity that we have as humans.
It seems to me not just theory and examples, but also like a training manual. Like I could go back through and spend 10 times the amount of time and practice all of these exercises that are in, or I could teach a course with this and spend months doing it, right? It's full of steps for how do you do this part of planning a campaign or continuing a campaign to change things, right?
Yes, and I think many folks who talk about social change, they bring answers, which there's no problem with that. I'm open to many alternatives, many proposals. The book, Remaking Democracy, our book is really an invitation and a structure for you to make your own answers, right? So the idea is that the way we overgrow autocracy is through many, many, many instances of participation. That democracy is actually a whole forest, right? It's not a single mountain, it's many, many trees, it's many, many animals. And each of those parts of that ecosystem, we are part of that ecosystem that is democracy. And when we practice democracy everywhere in our families, our faith life, our communities, our workplace, our education spaces, when we practice, we build resilient democratic culture that is resistant to many of the hacks, the hacking of our social, political, and economic systems that we have in the era of late stage capitalism, the dawning of AI, and kind of the massification and alienation of everything in existence, which is the economic system in which we live right now. So we believe that there isn't one solution, but it is all of us practicing participation and growing the participation of others that is the antidote in this time.
Elizabeth, did you want to add to that?
Oh, just that the metaphor is the spiral, and because it goes around and around, there's a repetition, but there's also a moving forward. And you're just right in saying that you could spend a lot of time with it. We have spent a lot of time doing this theory over and over. It comes out of what we do, and the practices like making desire statements or trying to formulate contradictions, we have been doing those for decades now, and we do them together, which is really important. Like we think together, and we have friction, and that helps us think better. And so we're really glad to finally share it with a wider audience, and it's absolutely something you can pick up again and again. It's designed that way.
We are starting to get some questions in the chat that I want to ask of you two, but I just want to note you talk about democracy and participation, and here we are on a day when the corporate media in the United States is telling us that having democratic voting is infighting and not having it is unity. I mean, I'm not sure our culture is quite on board with democracy, no matter how many wars we fight in its name. But before we get to questions, I wanted to talk about the spiral of change, because this is sort of the outline of your theory, and I think you have it available to show us, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk, Danielle,
Yes.
and I'll find it?
Sure. Yep. Um, so the spiral of change is essentially a way of conceptualizing a circular and iterative process of continuing to build greater and greater wisdom, strategy and wisdom and participation. Um, it is born out of our organizing work. It borrows from many great traditions, including the traditions out of Highlander Research and Education Center, Grace Lee Boggs and the Boggs Center, much of the work of kind of the Frankfurt School, Black feminism, and cybernetics. These are all kind of rich intellectual traditions that we borrowed from in writing the book. And so the spiral of change has 6 steps. And if you can't find it, Elizabeth, I can post it right now.
I got it.
Okay, great. So these are the 6 steps of the spiral of change. You can enter at any point in any place in the process, but essentially we start with one of the most important pieces when making change is coming to voice about um, the things that call you to organizing and social change, the specific things in your story that have to do with why you come to the table, whether as a witness or as a person who's experienced harm. And so we gather people and stories to share our stories and weave these connections and build across differences and make commitments to making change. And part of gathering is to start really looking at the problems we face. And we encourage folks in this process to really consider how you formulate a problem because it determines its sets of solutions. Therefore, we really try to analyze the roots of our problems from many angles, formulating them really in a path towards our desire. And we see our problems as emerging within dynamic social systems, right? So this is the concept under behind the women's consciousness raising groups, Black Lives Matter, the Dreamers, people who come together with common concerns. Mothers I worked with who had their children taken by DCFS. These are folks coming together to say, what is it that we're facing, and starting to make sense out of the kind of the set of overlapping experiences. And we ask people, once we get to that problems are so big and kind of clarifying, that we pause and then we take time to generate desires. So we really think before kind of moving to action to think about what it is that we want. And then we return to the problems in thinking about them in their contradiction. So contradiction is pivotal to the book, to Remaking Democracy, because contradictions are where we can find points of leverage where small changes can have big impact. And that's really where we can look at making kind of strategic interventions and change. And we find those contradictions, when we unearth those contradictions, we find vulnerable points in the system. We design interventions guided by our desires. So we just and that we can be playful, that can be in the arts, that can be in protest, in many, many domains. And then as soon as we act, we begin to forge for the consequences of our actions, which is why independent media like David's work and other work of folks at the table, I see Don is on from WEFT here in town, our community radio station, that the consequences are so important for us to visualize so that we can see our actions. And we get an opportunity to reflect, change our minds, and grow in coalition and begin the process again, regathering, formulating problems, desires, and then thinking about those vulnerable points in systems and acting. And that is really how so many successful social change movements have made progress, is through the spiraling that also builds wisdom, and it builds coalition as it turns.
Elizabeth, do you want to add to that?
I would just say that formulating contradictions is it's where the systems that oppress are pinching us. It's and it's where they're vulnerable, and that's why the points of leverage are there. But maybe as we start to talk about some examples, we'll
Well,
be able to
my favorite bits in this book are where you look at a problem and you describe it in terms, as you say, as a conflict, and then you re-describe it as a contradiction. So if you don't mind, for example, on page 149, this is looking at homelessness. Millions of people sleep on the streets in America, the land of opportunity. People are homeless because they don't work, they're addicted to alcohol and drugs, they have mental health issues, or they have children they can't support. And then you analyze, what does that mean? If that's what the problem is, what answers
Let's
does that
warehouse them.
direct us toward?
Exactly. Let's just give them minimal support and warehouse them and sort them into deserving and undeserving poor. Yep.
And then the much better way, I think most people will agree, on page 151 of putting it, millions of people who sleep on the streets in America, the land of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, are treated as objects, as though their value derives solely from their productive capability, as though their equality is contingent on proving their worthiness. Police and social workers alike use residents' responses to this objectification, such as self-soothing, retreating, or speaking up, to justify denying them necessities, human dignity, and care.
Yes.
Completely different way of looking at it.
Yes. And each formulation, and there are, thousands, actually intends a whole set of actions. The language actually puts certain actions into motion, right? And I think part of throughout, we ask people to practice in language, which could also be in performance, thinking about and honing the world it is that we want. This chapter in particular is around our efforts at Cunningham Township. I'm the Cunningham Township supervisor here in Urbana, Illinois, and 9 years of efforts to end homelessness in our community, starting with our children, and really looking at the ways in which the landscape in which I navigate doing this work, in which our office navigates, is this either this kind of undeserving and undeserving poor sorting that happens that has whole racial and gender implications, or really looking through an equity lens and understanding a systems analysis of why we have homelessness at all in one of the most with so many resources around us. In our community, we'll spend 25 to 30 million changing the assembly halls so the acoustics for basketball is better. But we won't spend $2 million on a shelter to provide basic place for people to rest who may need it, who may be finding themselves stranded in Urbana or having been here for a while without the means of being able to have independent housing.
Yes, indeed. Should we maybe stop sharing the screen so we can see your faces?
Absolutely.
There is someone's brought a topic to the call in the chat, and I wonder if you were just starting to work with this person on this issue, what you would recommend. They're talking about, how do you get landlords to behave decently? How do you compel that? And they propose a solution of blocking landlords from buying more properties if they are not, obeying laws and so forth. But so they've already got the problem and the answer. But what would you recommend?
Well, so I think that with any issue like that, and I'm extremely familiar, and with that specific issue, because my office regularly helps people who've been displaced by condemnation. In Champaign-Urbana last year alone, we helped, there were over 600 units that were condemned due to landlords who essentially have figured out how to make money off of not housing people, right? Or housing them in such terrible conditions. So I think that one of the things in looking at that is to gather people and stories, right? To think who is impacted by that and what are their stories, what is going on with them. There's a whole as we learned here with a 500 unit apartment complex, there was a story that was being told, which is these are a bunch of squatters. And then there was a reality of what happened. And so what our office did is our street outreach team went out and canvassed and talked to families with children, elders, living in basements with water turned off, senior citizens who had just filled up their bathtub with a hose and were cleaning out of the bathtub in Champaign-Urbana, right? The same place that spent $35 million raising the acoustics of the Assembly Hall, okay? And so we gather those stories together and start looking with the people, with the folks who are impacted, right? How do we formulate these problems within systems? How is it that landlords make money off of not housing people in this economy, right? And what does that look like in lifting up those stories? And then talking about what it is that we want, right? And sometimes that could be everything from like, let's get out of this bad situation in this horrible place where the power and water has been shut off, right? Totally legitimate desire to how do we keep folks from investing in our community in a way that removes housing rather than adds housing, removes affordability rather than increasing it. And that's when we look at contradictions. And I will tell you the most fun work that I do is working at contradictions. And I'll give a related story. Last December, Champaign, which is part of our Twin Cities here in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, the city council, at the behest of the business community, put an anti-camping ordinance on the agenda last minute with no discussion. I am the chair of homeless service providers here, a 50-member organization. We had no idea. And we found out about it at 8 o'clock in the morning. And by 7 o'clock, we had 100 people there. We had 30 people speak, many folks who have lived experience of homelessness, who are staying in shelter or on the street, who spoke because of the relationships, the gathering that we've done prior to that moment to develop trust and relationships. And we spoke, and many queer folks spoke specifically about what it means to force people into congregate shelter when you are a trans person, when you're a person, gender nonconforming person. And Champaign had just received an award being one of the most LGBTQ plus friendly cities in the country. Now, that was such an intense contradiction. You could see the city council members who had put forward the resolution flinch, like their faces flinched, like they were caught, right? Just like we are sometimes caught in contradiction. The pain of the existing oppressive systems comes from the contradictions in our lived experience. And all of us at this point are experiencing that, whether it's extreme weather, fire, not being able to breathe the air. It's consuming more and more. It's a wider and wider swath. So what was so interesting in that moment, to come back to the story in Champaign, is that the contradiction was so bald-faced and so intense that the city council, who had the votes to pass it going into that singular meeting, voted 0-9 to defeat it, and they apologized profusely. And so it doesn't always end up that way, right? I've been an organizer for a long time, but that was an example of when you have really done that work, that spiral of change work to get to that point, and you're really pushing on that contradiction, and you stick folks into a corner who are decision makers living in your community, who have to, they have to deal with the people that they see shopping in the grocery store and account for their behavior. So that was a very exciting vote that put that issue to rest, at least for now.
Excellent.
Yeah, I would just say that you need the people, and getting the people involves the storytelling of the people. In New York, we have rent laws that are the envy of the rest of the country, but then they're not enforced. And so, you keep digging at the contradictions. We won a lot in 2019, and it's still totally inadequate, and the housing crisis continues. Um, so there's the possibility of land trusts. There's
But I think it's important that you talk in the book about story banking, about collecting all of these stories and the people who tell the stories and bringing those people to the places where they need to be to tell the stories. When I worked for a group called Acorn, and we were organizing poor people in neighborhoods, and we worked in big coalitions with all these think tanks and unions, and our role was to bring the actual people impacted by the thing to show up and say in the first person, this is what you all are talking about. And there are examples in the book of your doing that, of changing laws by bringing people to talk about things that have only been, theoretical and devoid of life in the conversations.
yeah, and there's a kind of there's a there's a way that that can happen in a service providery sort of way that is not what we're trying to talk about, as much as like organizing together, and some you know, I think the media is still trying to talk to us as if we're right and left, and maybe we need to see ourselves as up and down instead. And getting all us down folks together is how we're gonna, one person, one vote is still a pretty radical idea if we can insist upon it. It's not the only thing, it's not sufficient, but it's definitely necessary to, change your housing laws in Springfield, Illinois. If that's what to include enforcement, to make violations really hurt you in the pocket. In Crown Heights, you got to get your building together, or you get a whole portfolio of buildings together, and you all call in your violations over and over again until it actually hits the pocketbook of these enormous corporations that own, tens, if not hundreds of properties of, 80, 800 tenants each or something, like huge buildings. We just got a huge citywide, portfolio-wide union of one landlord that's like 90 buildings of like apartment buildings, and we forced the sale. Unfortunately, it's to another slumlord, but we did have we have a momentary point of leverage where we can force more repairs because there's suddenly a national spotlight on this set of buildings because of the organizing that took place. Like, they brought the spotlight.
This is something else that comes up in the book, that you can use multiple tactics. You can tell the stories and do the media and change the culture, and you can figure out a way that creates a financial cost to the person doing the abusive thing. And there's a section where you look at tactics of direct service, education, creative work, legal work, policy advocacy, electing candidates, direct action, etc. All of these things combined works better than any of them, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
You're muted, Danielle. You're muted. If you want to unmute, we can.
No, we talk about in the design section. So this is really a design manual. It has a lot of there's a meaty section in the center that gives you a lot of ways of thinking about designing, and in particular, how to coordinate a variety of tactics. I think there's a lot of arguing over which tactic, and actually it's really important that we approach the work that we're doing with a spirit of experimentation, and starting with low stakes, because frankly, your first experiments are going to be wrong. And so you don't want the first experiments to have such a huge impact. It's more like you need to try something out and then notice what the consequences are. So we talk a lot about and have exercises for doing just that.
In the book, one of the examples you give is the prison phone costs issue. And I know at Roots Action, we've got an online action. People can push their state legislators and governors on this. I think there are at least 6 states that have made it free now, but there had to be the federal get rid of a federal ban on making it free, like allow that to be possible in the states. And that was the campaign that you wrote about in the book, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I worked for a number of years at Media Justice. I was the campaign coordinator for the National Campaign for Prison Phone Justice. And we brought impacted residents from our member organizations who were organizing for phone justice and um, an end to mass incarceration and abolition in their communities. And they came to Washington, D.C. And I tell the story in the book of actually going into the room that just Chick-fil-A had actually been in, providing kind of a corporate free for all of chicken. And then we took over the room afterwards, and young folks from families of the incarcerated spoke their stories publicly to a national audience for the first time, and the role of story-based strategy and making change. We were able to pass prison phone justice before the FCC with the help of Congress. And then I worked very closely with Representative Carol Emmons here in Illinois in her first year, and we passed one of the best rates of prison phone calls in the country at that time. And I will say we passed that under a Republican governor who was going to veto the bill. And we personally testified to that Governor Runner and his chief of staff, Tyler. And we pitched why it was so important. And we spoke we attempted to kind of legitimize some of the shared positions that we saw in terms of families being able to stay connected. And they basically decided not to veto the bill. The governor did have that opportunity, and he did not take it after he heard from the families. So that part was not in the story of the book because we had to make some cuts, but the national story was. And so I think it's important to understand that power of story coming together with an organizing force of really looking at where are the strategic levers for change. And I think we live at a time of a lot of exhaustion. It's very easy for people to make a lot of noise and move very quickly and try a lot of, and to kind of burn out. And I'd really encourage you to think about Remaking Democracy as a manual that helps you really gather with others and strategically intervene in ways that are joyful and pleasurable and grounded in the values in the world that you want to be making, because otherwise we'll exhaust ourselves with the number of challenges that we're facing right now.
That's the other thing about the diversity of tactics is there's something for everyone to do. We're trying to increase everybody's participation because we the many are more than the few who are oppressing us, and so if we can get everyone to participate, they won't be able to pull this over on us. And so we're not all going to be able to participate in the same way, but if we can coordinate, if we talk beforehand and we have the same desires, informing our different tactics, there's more ways to plug in and more ways to collaborate and work together.
Elizabeth, can you tell us a little bit about the School for Designing a Society? It just seems such a wonderful concept to stop and think, how would I design this society, when the biggest proposals we hear in our politics and media is to, fund something at only 95% or whatever that it currently, designing a society. How do you do that?
Yeah, you think big. When I first heard of it, it sounded fascist to me because I thought it was top down. But that is not the idea at all. It is expressly anti-fascist, and I think its core values are the uniqueness of every person and the indispensability of all people, and so trying to elicit the uniqueness of the people. So it's a ragtag bunch of artists and activists who have been gathering since 1993 or 1, or they knew each other before, and they're asking themselves, what is a society that I would like to live in? and they're inviting whoever wants to come, who wants society to be different, to also ask that question and to use the answers as inputs to creative projects in the domain of their interest, which has been many different domains, from healthcare to permaculture to, I don't know, almost you name it. Uh, it happened often in the summer in rural West Virginia, and then it happened also in Urbana on a more kind of regular basis
at the Gesundheit Institute with Patch Adams.
Yes,
correct.
indeed.
Played by Robin Williams, if nobody remembers that.
Yes, there's a real Patch Adams.
Yes, the actual Patch Adams.
And I bring him dinner every Tuesday night. Yeah. He's an elderly person who lives down the street in my community. So
very good.
He's our dear friend who who created a vision for a free silly hospital that is based on where centering, and we have a whole chapter actually on healthcare, redesigning care in healthcare, and the work of many clowns and clown doctors through that project that really looked at how do we redesign to put care at the center of our healthcare system. And some of the lessons we can learn from clowning, which is a trick to bring love close and helps people it kind of helps to transport people out of a reality that is incredibly bureaucratic within a disease management system, such as our healthcare system has become.
Some of the other issues and tools that come up in the book that interest me that I heard about more some years back than recently include the whole indie media and independent media movement and independent media centers, as well as the World Social Forum that we were talking about before we started recording. Can you talk a little bit about the role that these have played over the decades?
Yeah, so actually, for those who have the book, chapter 1 is called Analysis Living in Contradiction. And it really starts at the US Social Forum that happened in Detroit in 2010. I was listening to Grace Lee Boggs, who's one of my political mentors through talks I've heard and readings. She wrote a couple of books I strongly recommend. Since I have book lovers here, I'll say The Next American Revolution. It's an amazing book that's very relevant to these times. And the other is with her partner, Jimmy Lee Boggs, who is a longtime auto workers union organizer. They wrote From Revolution to Evolution in the early 70s. And that book really analyzes the revolutions of the 20th century and talks about some of the shortcomings of those revolutions. But anyway, in this chapter 1, we talk about kind of the grounding of some of the ideas in the book in the World Social Forums and US Social Forums. And then we talk a little bit about the origins of the independent media movement. Really started with a call from the Zapatistas to use the internet as a way for communities dealing with the crisis of neoliberalism to be able to speak to an international audience. And the Zapatistas did this so well. And one of the responses to that call was during the protests against the World Trade Organization in Seattle, when the longshore workers shut down the entire West Coast, as we are seeing calls for strikes now with longshore workers. I met a lot of great longshore workers in Seattle during those protests. Out of that came the use, really kind of the first blog, so to speak, or one of the first blogs in the Independent Media Center of Seattle, creating a space for ordinary people who are in the streets to use tell their stories to an international audience. And it was so, the mainstream media had created this contradiction, which is that it had downsized news outlets so much that it couldn't stay on top of the real story. So when indie media came in, And when we started to share our stories of truths from the, from the streets, it filled this enormous gap in the loss of local news. And there were millions of folks who viewed those stories, and the World Trade Organization at the time kind of became a household name, and it had been operating under the radar for so long, really starting, it was really this mechanism for the dismantling of local democracies and the challenging of local democracies as barriers to free trade, and even being able to sanction and fine countries, excuse me, that was a Freudian slip, to fine countries for allowing local democracy to get in the way of business. So that was a pivotal moment in our history when it could have gone differently, and it did in many ways. I mean, many organizing projects came out of that moment, that fertile moment of resistance. And I talk a little bit about that. We here in Urbana created the Urbana-Champaign Independent Media Center in my living room on Carl Park, gathered our equipment together, and we wanted to have a sustainable space. We now have purchased the post office building in downtown Urbana, and it's a 30,000 square foot media and arts center that really is a space for people to plant their ideas. And I see Heather Alt is on, and I know Heather was involved with the Independent Media Center here. Good to see you. I put in the website for our brand new website that went live just a couple of days ago that gives you a flavor of what we have become as an engine for media making, education, and gathering, and really was a balm and an important space during the pandemic. We continued to create virtual spaces to gather, and then as soon as we could safely came back together. So this is the stage where many emerging artists, many speakers, many people have been impacted by state and police violence have told their stories. And it's wonderful to have that infrastructure, that movement infrastructure in our community. And there are many centers like ours that grew out of the independent media movement and have morphed into other things that continue to be gathering spaces for people to grow together.
And that website is ucimc.org. Elizabeth, do you, and I see a parallel also in Gaza in terms of corporate media being shut out or killed, and other media coming through. Elizabeth, do you want to talk a little bit about the role of the arts in all of this?
I would love to. So we need arts at all the stages on the spiral of change. Arts practice can help us. The way Danielle was talking before about trying things out, art is a place where you can try things out and the stakes are low. So if you're practicing, that's a reason to start in the arts instead of in heart surgery or astrophysics or something. So using the arts, we can depict our desires really effectively in different media. We can bring affect into what are sometimes overly cerebral discussions, so we can have our feelings. It's really important for sharing stories. It's really important for playing with ideas. The arts are really important for depicting contradictions, depicting the pinch that we feel when we're getting two opposite instructions that we can't possibly follow at the same time. And it's really good in reaching other people, in telling the stories that are part of our campaigns. And then we have, it's, so when after you've designed, which is in itself a kind of creative act of putting things together and rejecting things, then you have to kind of gather the stories and then retell them and start the process over again. So it's really at every moment of the process that you need the kind of associative and creative capacities of our brains that we can sometimes get shut off in crisis. So the book is hoping to remind you at every stage that creativity is your friend.
Yeah, I think it does that. There's a question in the chat. I don't know exactly what it means, but how can we get healthier leaders? Could mean activist leaders, could mean artistic leaders, could mean elected leaders. One of you has chosen to run for elected office successfully. Do you want to address their concern? I mean, I could guess the elephant in the room, the one person that everyone talks too much about in this world. But how do we get healthier leaders?
Well, so our mentor who survived the Holocaust said, "Believers make liars," Herbert Brun. And I think what's so important is that there's many, there's liars are kind of dime a dozen. The question is, do people believe them? And what are the mechanisms by which they're able to gather support? Um, what are the vacuums produced that aren't necessarily meeting people's needs, such that they would seek strong leaders? And so I think one of the important things is that the more we can meet our needs, the less there is that crisis. The more we can stave off catastrophic climate change, the more we are, able to kind of move out of crisis mentality and build healthy democracies. And I think that healthy democracies are leaderful. That means everyone is developing their leadership potential, and that we rotate leadership, and that leadership is not static, it's always moving through. And that we're building leaders and that we're organizing in intergenerational ways. One of the ways we're profoundly alienated right now is actually to be segregated based on age. And it's really important that we be connected to the history bearers who are there, who are our elders. I'm lucky that somehow I was the babysitter for Scott Camille, who started Vietnam Veterans Against the War. I was friends with Joe Corder, who's run the uh, Gainesville Iguana for many years. I grew up in Gainesville, where the women's liberation movement, many of the very fertile soil for women's liberation, and I hung out with elder women and men and trans folks, and they taught me so much. So I think part of it is we have to we are in a healing moment. I know it seems like we are also in a resist moment, right? But we are in a healing moment. We have to heal our relationships with our bodies, with each other, right? We have to heal our relationships with the earth and how we, move on the planet. And so a big piece of that is actually when we're in places of greater security and needs are met, we don't have the same kind of dysfunction where people are, kind of running into the arms of strong leaders because they're frightened. And there are some things to be that I think white supremacy, people who are carriers of white supremacy are frightened right now. People who are carriers of patriarchy are frightened. And the thing is to actually build bridges to show that they are not, there are, to live in a world where we are truly living in equality and in balance with the earth is beneficial to everyone. And it's a kind of disease to want to have power over others. And that logics of superiority actually hurt us all, right? And that logics of inclusion are what we need to be able to survive and thrive in this moment. So that is maybe not the answer you were looking for, Fern, but that's my answer, which is we get healthier leaders by not creating victims. Just like Angela Davis wrote the book, How to Make Prisons Obsolete, right? And you make prisons obsolete by basically making safer communities through mutual aid and developing public infrastructure that meets people's needs. At Cunningham Township, we've done both. We brought together a township, which is public. I'm an elected leader. I have a tax levy. It's awesome. I love having a tax levy. I give out millions of dollars every year to our neighbors in need. And we also facilitate mutual aid. And during the pandemic, we grew 72 gardens and we fed people fresh vegetables from the gardens through a bucket brigade that distributed those to neighbors in need. And that built a lot of resilience within our community that will last for many, many years, right? When we take care of each other and we build resilience in our communities, it's really unhackable, right? It's really like you can't turn people against your neighbor if you know your neighbors. And then we saw that with the ICE raids across the country. We saw folks see, we had people who voted for T-Man. I don't use that guy's name, and then they saw, wait, I didn't vote for them to take my son's, caregiver, my neighbor, my teacher. Like I didn't vote for that, is what we heard from them. We're like, actually, you did. And, but we understand that like when we are connecting, when they're connecting across difference, when they're connecting with neighbors, all of a sudden we become protective of the specialness of people in place. And the more that we kind of celebrate and lean into, the more we have kind of a joyful resistance in connection with one another, the more we'll have resilience. And resilience is what we need right now to survive this moment. It's a difficult time.
Something that comes up a lot in the book, which is, wonderful stories. But there's a lot of examples of people becoming activists through their own personal suffering, their own direct experience with the issue that they become an activist about. And there's activism that benefits them as therapeutic activism for the activist. Someone like Scott Camille, becomes an anti-war activist because he was in wars, but
Yep.
you build all this local community and it helps activism, right? But I'm just a guy who doesn't want to bomb human beings thousands of miles away because I think it's the most evil thing imaginable. Like I was never near a war. I never supported wars. What is the role of just caring about other people you've never met and never will meet versus the more local, personal basis for activism?
Mhm. Secondary trauma is real. And actually, I would say watching children die in Gaza, watching a quarter of the Iraqi population be eviscerated in the first Iraq war due to sanctions, watching cluster bombing, these are things that do impact us personally.
Yeah,
It affects, it injures our conscience,
yeah.
right? And we're a deeply empathetic species and we're able to feel each other's suffering. So I would say that there's impact there.
Good answer.
It's
Yeah,
the
Elizabeth.
people trying to stop you from doing anything that are that will frame the problem as not yours, right? And so it's up to you to frame your stake in the problem and articulate your moral injury and your pain, and to say that it matters. Where capitalism erases all of the connections between us, and we have to rearticulate them. Like it is a desire of mine that I could meet my needs without exploiting anyone. Um, I want that for all of us. Why can't we have that? Let's make it.
Yeah, good answer. We don't have a lot of minutes left. What have I not asked that I should? What have we all not asked that we should, that you want to tell us about this book? And how can we keep up with your work and follow and get involved? And somebody who reads this book and says, "Oh, I never been an activist. I'm not a political person, but my God, things are horrible now." I hear this from people like, "So you're an activist. How do you do that?" Like, what do you tell these people now who are suddenly, I don't know, somehow awakened? How do they get started?
Um, I would say read the book with the person you want to work with.
Yeah.
Like grab a buddy. As you need a buddy. You need friction. You need support. You need encouragement. You need to pick who buys the coffee. Like you need. So find the friend that you really want to spend time with, and then spend time with them talking about what really matters to you, which is how you want things to be and what's the matter with the way things are. And then look for more friends to do it with too. It was really
sorry,
it was designed to be used by groups. Like none of us can do this alone, and it's part of the oppressor to make you feel alone as part of how you feel stuck is not being in community with people. And you just need one to start out with. You just need a friend to figure out who you want that to be and call them up and buy them a book.
I put in the chat. We just launched. You get to see a draft of our website, which is why the URL is such. But we have a webinar series. It's free. We want to practice with you. We want to create spaces in which you can practice. And whether you've finished the book or not, or certainly we encourage people to read it. We have online workshops coming up August 18th. 25th and September 1st. They're at 8 p.m. Eastern time. They're free. You can sign up, and I put the link in the chat. And that is, we have already had several of them. We had folks organizing against data centers, folks organizing around having their children taken from them through the adoption kind of mill that was especially prominent in the 60s and 70s, kind of healing from that. Folks working on reproductive justice, folks working on housing, and housing access is such a major issue that people are facing. Surveillance. We just passed in Urbana last Monday a Democratic oversight of surveillance ordinance. And so I've been using this method to workshop with folks who are working on that. So I'd encourage you, if you're in Urbana, we have an Endless Possibilities Book Club on August 20th at the IMC at 6:30. So that is also available for folks here. And then we're going to be up in Chicago in August. We'll be at the Socialism Conference, and we'll be presenting at Pilsen Community Books. And we are on tour, and we want to come visit you. In fact, I saw somebody is from Portland. Diane, I think, said she was from Portland. Diane, we plan, first of all, I'm so sorry of what you're going through with climate change in Portland. Our hearts are with you, and we want to come visit Portland. We'll be doing a West Coast tour. We'll be in the East Coast. So if you would like to join our listserv, we don't share your email with anyone. And if you just sign up to connect, you'll get an email probably about once every week or so about what we're doing. And I put that in the chat as well.
And we will post those links with this video at rootsaction.org and at teachinnetwork.org/book clubs. And hopefully you'll make it to Virginia one of these days. And it's a wonderful book. I think get it and get a few copies and get a group and use it. Don't just read it. Remaking Democracy, How We Make the Worlds We Want, by our guests, Danielle Chynoweth and Elizabeth Adams. Thank you both so much for writing the book and for taking the time to talk with us.
Thank you so much. Thanks, David. Thanks, everyone. It was really great to be with you this evening.
For your questions.
Yeah, feel free to stay in touch with us. We'd love to come visit you.
Very good. Good night, everybody.
Good night.